At the age of 37 in 1956, Pauline Friedman Phillips approached the editor at the San Francisco Chronicle with a proposal, an advice column unlike any other, short, witty, and filled with common sense. He gave her a trial run. Her responses were so sharp and engaging that readers instantly took notice. Pauline chose the pen name Abigail Van Buren. Abigail because it sounded like a woman who was wise, and Van Buren from the U.S. President Martin Van Buren's last name because it held gravitas. Her column, Dear Abby, was an immediate success, praised for its punchy tone, compassion, and humor, and within months it was syndicated across the country. Dear Abby was the world's most widely syndicated newspaper column with over 110 million readers. The column took on issues which were conflicting at times and caused backlash from her readership. But she made clear that honesty and common sense was more important than ignoring the questions that were brought to her. The column addressed everything from infidelity to etiquette to LGBTQ+I acceptance, often ahead of its time. And despite the bags of hate mail she received from those who disagreed with her, she never flinched or backed down. There was one letter in May of 1972, a woman who was quite concerned by her new gay neighbors. In one piece of the letter, she states this was a respectable neighborhood before this odd couple moved in. They have all sorts of strange-looking people walking in and out of their doors, from whites and blacks and Indians. And yesterday, I even saw 2 nuns go inside there. They are wrecking the property value. How can we improve the quality of this once respectable neighborhood? And Dear Abby answered with 3 words: you could move. I guess that's one way to improve the property value. Dear Abby became a cultural institution, shaping how Americans talked about family, ethics, relationships, and social issues. It offered empathy, but did not shy away from giving tough love. We could say that Jesus is in his Dear Abby phase of the gospel. Jesus is home from travels and he sees all the mail that has accumulated and takes time to answer these questions, much like a column, but in person by a group of bystanders. His listeners and followers have come to him with questions, and like Abby, he responds not with shallow platitudes, but with parables, common sense, empathy, and yes, tough love. Jesus is going to begin his walk to Jerusalem after this. And it will be a different story in the Gospel of Matthew, a different shift that is happening, not a focus on stories, but challenges through his actions on Golgotha. But for right now, Jesus is telling stories and answering questions, and his premise for chapter 18 is how does Christians, or we could say how does church folk treat one another? The question to start off the entire chapter is, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he called a child and whom he put among them and said, truly I tell you, unless you become like this little child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child welcomes one such child in my name, welcomes me. And it's not exactly what the disciples are expecting, because I'm surely thinking that they thought Jesus was going to choose one of them. But Jesus takes it further and says, if anyone causes these little ones to stumble or to sin, it would be better for you if a great millstone was fastened around your neck and you drowned in the depth of the sea. Jesus, you need to take a pill and calm down. That attitude ain't winning any souls at all. See, remember from last week with Matthew's language, we are walking into the harsh language, not walking away from it. Jesus here is not talking about children, as many assume because of the example he just used to describe who will enter the kingdom of heaven. Rather, the term little ones cover many different persons. Those new to the fold and have not fully grown deep in faith, the weak, the wandering, the suffering, the troubled, we could say the vulnerable in the community too. And Jesus tells two parables. We're looking at only one of them today, but it is one of the most familiar parables other than the prodigal son. The sheep that gone astray. But before we hop into the story, we need to understand the characterization of the parable. It's important that we let characters in the Gospel of Matthew be what and who they are. The characters in Matthew are what most literary critics call flat characters, which are characters constructed around a single idea or quality, much different than what we see in Luke's gospel, which are round characters, which are complex and capable of change and even capable of surprising the reader. And as we look at this parable and the next two throughout the weeks, we're going to let them be straightforward and uncomplicated. Example figures of virtues and vices. See, the danger of allegory is that we miss details because we think we already know what it means. And maybe it is the aspect of self-knowledge which is lost when we leap too quickly into the allegorical meaning of Jesus' parables. So the parable is that one day a shepherd noticed that she is missing one of her sheep. And she doesn't just decide to stick with the 99, but she goes and leaves them. In the Aramaic, it says that there are other shepherds along, so she leaves them with other shepherds, but only in the Gospel of Matthew, it says that she leaves them, abandons them in the Greek to go and look for this one. And as she goes down and looks through every bit of the thicket and through the trees. And she walks up onto the hills and into the mountains to find this one. And when she finds the one that has when she finds this one, she begins to leap with joy and takes them back into the fold, this sheep that has gone astray. The story subverts the world's standards of what good shepherding is. Jewish scholar Amy Jill Levine reminds us of a different way to understand this parable. It's not about God losing anything, because God does not lose something. Rather, we as people have often lost, misplaced, or even taken for granted something or someone. And if God does not lose anything, then this parable is not so much about what we have lost, but about what is lost, but what we have misplaced and forgotten. It's about forgotten values, misplaced priorities, and the exclusion we ourselves have caused. The parable challenged us to do the deep and often uncomfortable work of examining the hidden and overlooked people in our lives and in our communities. Who has the church forgotten? Who have we pushed aside and failed to welcome in? We've lost many things. But perhaps the most troubling is that we've lost our sense of dignity and integrity as human beings. We've misplaced our role as Christians, choosing conformity with the world over transformation of the renewing of our minds. Instead of reflecting Christ, we've reflected power structures that marginalize and oppress. We could make a list that goes on and on and on. But at the core is this: we have surrendered our dignity and the dignity of others to gain approval of the worldly systems. We have traded truth for comfort, justice for power. The right to dignity is the principle that every person has inherited equal and inalienable worth that it must be protected by both individuals and institutions, and it is the foundation of human rights. And yet the church, called to be that beacon of truth, has often been one of the greatest offenders. We've promoted violence cloaked in religion, backed laws that fail to honor the image of God in every person, and turned our backs on the very people Christ would have dined with. And this week alone, we have seen a greater divide happening. And it is the church's duty and responsibility to say that all violence is evil, no matter who the victim is. And what might be harder is adhering to love your enemies as Christ has loved you. And lately, we've created and made a host of enemies. People who bear the image of God. There is a reason sheep stray from the flock. There's a reason people leave the church and never return. What have we truly offered them? The church's past is filled with missteps and misjudgments, especially toward the very people that should be seeking and welcoming and learning from it. These are the people who could help transform us, who could help lead us toward empathy and accountability and growth, people who could help us confront our biases and challenge our assumptions. No matter how open and accepting we believe ourselves to be, there is always more room to grow, always more of God's heart to embody. As the church, we're being called back, not just to find the lost, but to recognize what have we lost and how have we lost our way. Maybe you've heard the story about Barak. That's what they decided to name this sheep who left the fold. A sheep that had been wandering alone for years in Victoria, Australia. When rescuers from Eggers Mission Farm Sanctuary discovered him, Barak was in rough shape. He hadn't been shorn in years, resulting in massive overgrown fleece that weighed more than 75 pounds. So heavy that it matted, covered his face and eyes, limiting his ability to see or move or even eat properly. And beneath the wool, he was underweight and clearly suffering from years of neglect. Once rescued, the sanctuary gave him a much-needed shearing, removing the burden of his fleece and giving him a chance to heal and recover. And now, surrounded by other rescue animals, Barak is regaining his health and confidence. His story not only highlights the responsibility humans have in caring for domesticated animals, particular breeds like Barak, which rely on regular shearing for survival, but it also serves as a powerful reminder how neglect can weigh someone down. Literally and figuratively. It shows how compassion, attention, and care can lift burdens and restore life. Barak's story reminds us that people like sheep can become weighed down by years of neglect and pain and being overlooked. And what would it look like in our welcome? What would it look like in our Christian mission? What would it look like in our ways of the church to take the burden and the pain and the weight off the shoulders of so many who have gone astray? So many that we, the church, have pushed away. So many that we have not been able to sit down and have conversations with to learn from, to live with, to be with? What would it look like for the church to remove burdens and place on love and put a balm of grace on the sores? What would it look like for the church to bring in and welcome and love rather than to hate and spill more hate upon hate and divide in our culture? What would it look like as Christians to really bring and invite people into the kingdom of heaven? I tell you, it would look something like having dignity and integrity back once again. It would look like finding honor in God once again, committing to living into a kingdom narrative that is collective. Wouldn't it be a joy if the church helped change the minds of the people of the world? Amen.